10 agonizing signs that your marriage might end in divorce. Hi friends, welcome to Marriage Realities, a comprehensive relationship channel. Today's video is all about the 10 agonizing signs that clearly show that your marriage will definitely end in divorce. You never marry a spouse with the intention of divorcing him or her. When you marry a spouse, you only dream of a happy and stable marriage. The thought that your marriage might end in divorce never enters your mind. All you dream of is about your never-ending marital bliss. How nice it would be if your dreams come true. But often, living a happily ever after married life becomes a pipe dream to you, as after a few years you are completely disillusioned by your marriage. You're unhappy that your married life is not as rosy as you imagined it to be. You also become utterly disappointed with your spouse. The disappointments you have about your spouse and your marriage rages within you. You argue and fight with your spouse constantly to vent your disappointments and frustrations on him or her. And gradually you feel that your marriage might not work out as you dreamed it to be. Many bitter incidents happen between you that drives your marriage to the edge. You often wonder about what went wrong between you in your marriage that it should end in a divorce court. Here are the 10 ignored signs which makes your marriage end in a divorce court. The number one reason behind divorce is when you no longer care for your spouse. Do you know what is the most needed ingredient for a happy marriage? It is the care you have for your spouse. Only the relentless love you have for your spouse makes you feel caring and loving towards him or her. But in your unhappy marriage, care becomes the most missing element. When care bids goodbye from your marriage, you drift apart from your spouse in apathy and indifference. You do not care about the work-related stress your spouse is suffering from. You do not care about the health of your spouse. You are no longer supportive towards your spouse. You stop feeling protective about your spouse. When such is the scenario of your marriage, it is inevitable that your relationship would end in divorce. The number two reason behind divorce is complete lack of communication between you. After a few years of marriage, you seem to have nothing to talk with your spouse. Communication between you becomes that much non-existent in your unhappy marriage. Happy couples have so much to talk about. There is friendliness in the way they interact with each other. But when your marriage is unhappy, you do not communicate with your spouse as you feel there's nothing to talk with him or her. When you cease to talk with your spouse, silence rules your home. When there is lack of communication, your relationship with your spouse now turns stifling and oppressive to you, and you just want to get out of it. The number three reason behind divorce is when you become degrading towards your spouse. When you truly love your spouse, you will never ever degrade him or her. If at all you're angry with your spouse, you might fight and argue with him or her, but you will never in your wildest dreams degrade your spouse. But when there is no love between you, you humiliate your spouse in the worst possible manner. You utter harsh words against your spouse with the deliberate intention of hurting him or her. The derisive tone of your voice makes your spouse feel insulted by you. When you become demeaning towards your spouse, it just means that you have lost all love for him or her. An abusive marriage does not last. The number four reason behind your divorce is lack of tolerance. Tolerance is a key ingredient which makes your marriage happy and enjoyable to you and to your spouse. But when you become intolerant towards your spouse, all hell breaks loose in your relationship. It is because you convert even the minor differences between you and your spouse into a huge relationship issue. You accuse your spouse as the reason behind all your relationship problems. When you bid goodbye towards tolerance in your relationship, you find all sorts of faults with your spouse. You make mild arguments between you develop into huge fights. Your lack of tolerance makes your relationship all heated up and oppressed. Your constant impatience towards your spouse gradually drives your marriage to a point of no return. The number five reason behind your divorce is lack of transparency. When love bids goodbye from your relationship, you stop being open and frank with your spouse. In fact, you behave secretive and mysterious towards your spouse. This complete lack of transparency in a relationship makes both doubt the intention of each other. There is too much of hush-hush in your relationship that your marriage turns miserable to both. You do many unwanted things when there is lack of transparency in your relationship. You change the password of a social media account because you do not want your spouse to know about your social media activities. Your spouse is often clueless about your whereabouts. You never explain about your future plans to your spouse. You become that secretive towards your spouse that both become more of strangers to each other. The number 6 reason behind your divorce is you're never home. You drift too far away from your spouse that you do not like being home, as you no longer feel as a family with him or her. You often go away from your home without informing your spouse about your whereabouts. You do not offer an explanation about where you went to your spouse. You treat your home more like a lodge. You may be physically present at home, but mentally you're far away from your spouse. Such a scenario cannot last long in any marriage. The number 7 reason behind your divorce is you're no longer physically intimate with your spouse. When there's no love between you, the first thing that disappears from your marriage is sex. Normal and loving couples have regular sex. But when you have drifted away from your spouse, you no longer want to be physically intimate with him or her. You move to another room to avoid being physically intimate with your spouse. The way you treat your spouse like a stranger is a definite prelude to your divorce. The number 8 reason behind your divorce is you do not notice the presence of your spouse. When you are unhappy in your marriage, you refuse to acknowledge the presence of your spouse. You might be in the same room with your spouse, but you hardly look at each other. It is as though you are like two different islands. Not acknowledging your spouse is yet another sign that your marriage will not last. The number 9 reason behind your divorce is indulging in extramarital affairs. When you are unhappy with your marriage, you easily cheat your spouse. Many a time you indulge in extramarital flings just for the heck of it. Strangely, you do not feel guilty for being disloyal towards your spouse. That indifferent you have become towards your spouse. Naturally, your spouse finds it impossible to forgive your extramarital affairs. Indulging in extramarital affairs will definitely kill your marriage. Number 10 reason behind your divorce is when your futuristic life does not include your spouse. When your marriage is happy, your futuristic plans always include your spouse. You often discuss your future with your spouse. Your love for your spouse is that intense that you cannot imagine your future life without him or her. But when all love is lost between you, your future plans about your life does not include your spouse. Can you see the miserable signs that proclaim that your marriage is very unhappy and would definitely end in a divorce court? When you experience any of these negative signs in your married life, act immediately to solve your relationship issues and save your marriage. Did this video make you understand the devastating reasons behind your decision for divorce? Marriage Realities will have many such relationship eye-openers. Subscribe to my channel to understand your marriage in a new light. Press the bell icon for updates about my latest relationship videos. Make love forever until death do us part, your relationship goal.